Every now and then you read a comic that completely subverts your expectations. And I don't mean in a let's get Aya to kill the Night King sort of way. I mean in a way that surprises you whilst remaining appropriate to the story and gets you thinking about the media you are engaging with. And DC's Flintstones from 2016 did just that for me. I know, the Flintstones. How on earth is that going to subvert my expectations? Now, this series was recommended to me by a friend and I went in with very little knowledge about the franchise. I vaguely remember the odd cartoon from when I was small and watching a live action film from 1994. I'm really old. Over the following decades, I don't think I had any sort of interaction with the Flintstones. I went in with not a huge amount of enthusiasm and I came out feeling empowered. So what did the little town of Bedrock do that not only surprised me but kept me reading its 12 issues? Sure, it has all the puns you'd expect with those prehistoric twists on modern shops, items and life, Pelican dishwasher, the Bronto crane, armadillo bowling ball, etc. The usual faces are all there. You've got the Flintstones and the neighbours the Rubbles. It has all the pieces that resemble that beloved cartoon, but the people and the setting are not enough. Something is off. This is not the Bedrock I remember. It's not the happy-go-lucky place I thought it would be. This Bedrock has a darker edge to it. So the Flintstones originally appeared in 1960, a time still clinging on to the decade preceding it. After the horrific years of the Second World War, America experienced an economic boom in the 50s, one that grew and strengthened the white middle class and brought consumerism to millions. For many, it was a real time of optimism. This was reflected in those early Flintstones episodes, with those new cutting-edge appliances and technologies parodied in those prehistoric homes. If those original episodes mirrored then you could also argue that DC's 2016 version is a reflection of its time period as well. Mark Russell, the writer of the 12 issues, attributes environmental catastrophes, the rise of fascism, and the failings of institutions as inspiring the story. Now, it shocks me to say that 2016 was 8 years ago, and a lot of terrible things have happened in those years, but 2016 did not feel wonderful either. For millions, the memories of the financial crash were still fresh, and the effects still felt. Particularly for younger generations, there was no feeling of optimism for the future. Failing economic system, late stage, dialectics. As Chomsky once said, chains. But for real, let's get back to the point. 2016's Flintstones is a work of anti-capitalist fiction. As you'd expect, the stories do generally focus on Fred as the main character, but his adventures don't feel like adventures. Instead, they read as stumblings through a mire of existentialist crisis after crisis. He takes the role of our working class hero, challenging the status quo and battling to better the lives of those he works alongside. Conditions at the quarry are dangerous, with Slate, his employer, showing little care for his employees. He deliberately employs migrant workers with the aim of exploiting them for cheap labour. When a worker gets buried under rubble, it's Fred who leads the effort to free this undertrained worker, going against Slate's orders. Slate is an obvious representative for the wealthy generally, putting profit before the well-being of people and cutting corners wherever possible. Fred is the antithesis of Slate, putting his neck on the line for others for seemingly no benefit to himself. This is seen consistently through the 12 issues, with him standing up for women, a gay couple, as well as other cultures. At times, he is a really eloquent protagonist. A few others also get chances to challenge the system, particularly Wilma, who has a continuing story about losing that sort of housewife role to become an artist. We get to experience the barriers she faces doing that. In fact, their relationship doesn't really conform to stereotypes, with Wilma often acting as Fred's emotional support and his rock. None of this will be a surprise for anyone familiar with the writer Mark Russell, particularly works like Billionaire Island. He is known for adding politics to his work, which can rub people up the wrong way. The thing is that he was still really new to the comic writing scene, having only started in 2015 with Prez. Redeveloping a decades-long franchise was a pretty ballsy move so early on in a career, so it is a surprise to find out that it's such a well-fleshed-out world. It is not a soapbox for a political message, but a really well-thought-out community. Bedrock has a history. It feels lived in, but retains its original feel even if Russell has no reverence for it. But there is affection. Speaking of its history, this is a community founded on bloodshed. Fred, Barney and many of their peers were veterans of the Paleolithic Wars. They can be seen at meetings discussing not only the horrors they saw, but the ones they committed too. For they had carried out a genocide against the forest people, an act seemingly only done in fear of the other and not a defensive action against aggression. These actions and memories stick with the veterans, with some seeking out help on mental health hotlines. Those in group therapy are taught a nonsense phrase to help them get through those dark thoughts. Yabba dabba doo, a once joyous catchphrase given a new, much darker meaning. Whilst these soldiers try to come to terms with their past, their present tries to recreate these events. The populace vote for a populist, an angry fear-mongering figure posing himself as almost like a godlike figure. Just listen to this.
Children of Clod, you shall taste the wine of victory. The lizard people should be vanquished, and it will be easy.
Clod incites the bedrockers against the lizard people, who have seemingly shown no aggression before this. The rhetoric is something that Fred recognises as being very familiar from those previous conflicts, and he remembers that they weren't the good guys. Clod redirects funds from childcare and schools to fund wars and dinosaur armour. On a side note, how cool does the armour look? Steve Pugh does an amazing job bringing the world to life. Clod is ultimately shown to be an idiot, but that's what makes him dangerous, as he's an idiot with power. Like when his expensive pterodactyl drones attack civilians instead of the lizard people. Costly and dangerous flop. If you take all those ingredients shown in the Clod storylines, the ultra-nationalist racist approach taken by a demagogue trying to instill a mythology of past victories, this sounds very much like the start of a fascist state. But luckily for all, power is taken away from Clod due to his incompetence. Another interesting aspect in Bedrock is religion. The inhabitants seem very interested in having a god, and are eager to listen to many of the iterations thrown at them, like Peaches or Morp, before the deity's final form is created, Gerald. The priests play around with different ways of worship, including through pain to balance out sins, suggesting Russell is pretty critical of religion, but Gerald was shown in the end as fulfilling a void in some people's lives, and that's okay. But the true religion is consumerism. Russell presents religion and consumerism side by side, drawing parallels in the issue Buyer Beware. People are sold things that they don't need, only to find out they are often shoddy products. Fred even becomes part of this, with a side hustle of selling vitamins. He struggles though, as, in his own words, if people really need these vitamins, then we shouldn't have any problem selling them. Fred and Wilma quickly realise that they are left feeling empty from accumulating all these things, and even confused as to why they did it. Thankfully realising it's their relationships with each other and others that matter. Of course, what underpins all of this is a class structure that benefits those at the top. This is very simply shown in issue 6. Fred has busted his butt to dig out a pile of rock taller than him. In return, he is given a pile of pebbles no taller than a finger length in return. He, like the other workers, are exploited for their labour. Problem is that work for many is a source of purpose and pride, as well as a means of survival. When Fred and his colleagues are laid off, he goes through an existential crisis. With no safety net, it can be devastating to lose work. While some struggle, others can do well for themselves. We see this in Bedrock as the town gets more and more gentrified, where new residents are concerned at the decor in Fred's garden, the concern being that it might harm property prices. As more affluent people enter the neighbourhood, things get more expensive, pricing original inhabitants out. For example, Fred's rent gets raised again, with the landlord knowing if Fred can't pay it, there will be someone else who can. Once that example becomes common, you can have whole communities uprooted. Of course, with all stories of struggle, you have to have an emotional thread running through it. But the biggest emotional story beats do not come from the Flintstones, the Rubbles, or any of the humans, but instead from the most exploited group, the true underclass, those living creatures used as appliances. Whether you're a power goat or the octopus dishwasher, it's a tough life. It seems to be a truly harrowing experience where they are used and chucked away without a moment's thought. And these creatures are sentient, capable of fear, love and empathy. The friendship between the vacuum cleaner and the bowling ball truly plucks at the old heartstrings. I'm not sure if they are meant to come across as a slave class, but it certainly feels that way. Although they are all different species with different roles, they are united by one thing: hating that class traitor Dino. What Russell does really well to show is that Bedrock is very much a developing society, experiencing things like capitalism, religion, marriage for the very first time. This makes it easy and understandable for those ideas to be questioned by the inhabitants and to be gently made fun of. Why should we settle down for monogamy? What was wrong with the sex cave? Whether it's established or not, the whole system is incredibly fragile. Within minutes of learning of a meteorite strike, society collapsed into bedlam with looting, clubbing and pandas going wild. This reminds us all that the world only works because we conform to it. Of course, the end of the world doesn't happen, and the prehistoric people go back to pretending to be good people. Interestingly, Russell planned around the strong potential for the series being cancelled, so the storyline creates a really nice end to a 6-issue series. But luckily for us there were 6 more. As I said, this emerging societal system they are experiencing is very new and only succeeded the hunter-gatherer lifestyle a few generations before. In fact, it was Wilma's mother who experienced the change. It was her and her fellow women who worked out the secret to planting and harvesting whilst the men hunted. It had an unexpected consequence as surplus food encouraged trade. Women found themselves also to be a tradable resource, with Wilma's mother traded for some goats. Interestingly, Russell had mentioned in an interview with Comic Concierge his worry about humans turning into products. And I guess that's kind of mirrored here. So a lot is covered and many different themes within the 12 issues. Clearly, Russell projected a lot of his politics into the series, and it's not subtle. In fact, Russell recognises this and stated that nuance is dead, so he clearly doesn't care about that. Instead, issues are hurled at us like an armadillo bowling ball. But weirdly, it never comes across as being too preachy, despite the comics being Russell's mouthpiece. Him and Pugh present ideas through humour, a much better way of bringing people along for the ride. Ignoring all the politics though, and you're left with a fresh take on a decades-old franchise. Both Russell and Pugh do an excellent job reimagining Bedrock and bringing it into the 21st century. But what did you think? Too much? Or was it a fun take on an old franchise? Let me know in the comments. Oh yeah, there were aliens too. The Great Gazoo was in it.